All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the very first episode of the Curious Storyteller podcast. I'm your host, Kelley, and I'm on with my first guest, Rachel Rothenberg. Welcome to the Curious Storyteller podcast, Rachel.
I'm so excited. I didn't know that I was going to be the first guest.
Yes, maybe that is something I should have said at the beginning. To give you all just a little lowdown on why I started this podcast in the first place, I used to be a TV journalist. I have a journalism degree, and I really want to get back into broadcasting, and I want it to be fun and playful, and I really wanted to engage with my friends and just have like conversations and riff and just see where the conversations go. Over the pandemic, I found myself having like hours-long conversations with people, and I just like a lot of nuance came out of that, and I figure like why not record some of it, and then hopefully maybe other people can have, like universal significance from it. And so that's kind of the basis of the podcast. There is no like theme other than like chatting with friends, laughing, and maybe talking about some cool stuff.
Yeah, totally.
So the way I like to start off is just kind of telling everyone or telling people like kind of how we met, and then just kind of allowing the conversation to go from there, if that works for you.
Yeah, perfect.
So I met Rachel at our friend Stephen John's wedding last fall in Chicago at the Surgical Museum.
Yes.
Which is like, a very specific place. Also, Chicago has like the weirdest museums. But we met at Stephen John's wedding. They were getting married. I wasn't actually supposed to be there because I was supposed to originally be in New York. And then last minute, I couldn't go to New York because my friend had to cancel. I texted Steve. I was like, oh my God, I think I can come to your wedding. Can I please come to your wedding? He was like, yes. And then one of the people I met there was Rachel.
Because I had dislocated my kneecap like a month before. So I was still in a brace at the time, and I couldn't dance or anything. Like, you can't do like any of the stuff that's usually people that you do to have fun at a wedding, like dance or whatever. So I was just sitting like, I was just sitting like at one of the tables, just like drinking my gin and tonic, very forlorn. And you just came over and you were like, are you by any chance a Sagittarius? Or like, are you a Scorpio or something like that? And I was like, my moon sign is. And you're like, oh, that makes so much sense. And I was like, are we best friends now? Sometimes I think it's like you have one of those moments where like you meet somebody and it's like maybe it's the alcohol, but like you just kind of like click really instantly. And like, yeah, I definitely think that like it was one of just those like everything just aligned, and we were like hanging out, and I'm like, I have no idea who this person is, but they're so cool. And
that is so funny that that's how I approached you, because I do not remember that being the way that I approached you. I mean, I will admit that like I was in very happy form during that wedding. Like I was like there to be at the wedding. I was like, let's dance, like let's meet people. But yeah, I do remember coming up to you, and I remember saying something about astrology. And I think that that's when we connected. And I don't remember if I said Scorpio or Sag, but I know you're Sag moon and Scorpio rising, right? Yeah. So I remember just like talking to you a bit, and then I don't know, we connected a little bit. We chatted, and then we kind of just from there we got to know each other a little bit more. And now I'm in Seattle right now. And I'm kind of, I've been traveling around a little bit, and we've gotten to know each other a little bit more this week, which has been really nice.
Yeah. Have you enjoyed your time in Seattle?
I am. Yeah. I am working right now, so I feel a little bit more limited on like me going out and exploring the area.
Yeah.
Compared to I was in Portland a week ago and I really wasn't working. So I felt like I had more opportunity to explore Portland than Seattle. So I kind of want to come back and really maybe during the summer or like in a little bit nicer weather to like really.
Yeah. I mean, it's also like we're getting like our one freak snowstorm of the year. So
it's okay.
It's hard.
It's okay.
Like, yeah. But no, I mean, I think because it's the power of socials, right? Like, because we were drunk, we're like, let's be friends on Instagram. And then, I think we were like bonding over political memes or something like that. All this stuff that, like now informs, I think, our professional work. That
Definitely.
It's, like emerging, but also,
I think sometimes I also like really like the content that you put out on Insta, because sometimes I'm like, I just need another leftist to like validate that I am not the insane one. Because sometimes I feel like I'm the one amongst all of the moderates that's like posting, and people are looking at me like
Really? Do you
yeah.
feel that your feed has turned out that way, or you think just
No, I think it's like my own internalness. I don't think it's like actually my feed. I think it's like I have this like idea in my head that I'm the leftist.
Yeah.
When I don't, like, I am leftist, but like I don't, like, it's like that, like people I think I do want to see all of my feed to be more leftist.
Right.
And you know, people talk about that like social bubble thing where like you only see the people that you agree with, and I was like, that's really actually not my feed. Not to say that I have like Trump supporters, because I don't, but I do find that like my ideology tends to be a little bit more left leaning than I think a lot of, or at least maybe I publicly talk about it more.
Yeah.
Maybe I think that's more what it is.
Yeah. I do think that there's like this whole spectrum about, I don't know, I think like even on Instagram there is sometimes like some kind of like there's like rules that I find sometimes really stressful about like how you're supposed to post, the kind of things that you're supposed to do. Especially like, you know, I have like, you know, like my members of my family are on my Instagram. So like I don't want to be like, okay, well, you know, here I, you know, like I posted something like an image on my feed after the Dobbs decision came out, and it said something like, you know, and it's like kind of flip, right? But it was like, hating cops isn't the only facet of my personality.
Right.
I also love abortion. And I sort of had, you know, you sort of like get this thing where, you know, you're like, okay, I'm trying to like be funny, express my politics, and like,
but also be a person.
Right, exactly. And like try to figure out, okay, like how do I, you know, how can I like be in community with people? But like at the same time, I also think that in some ways, like the ways in which you can like kind of present your beliefs on socials, like if you like, so if I'm expressing something about, you know, abortion or about, you know, the police or something like that, if you can veil it in humor, sometimes I think the kind people who would otherwise be like, ooh, what is she saying? Right. Yeah. They can see it more clearly. I think they're also laughing.
Yes, you know? But I think that this is where your Sagittarius moon really shines, because Sag energy is very like, I'm gonna like tell you something. Yeah. I'm going to like state something, but I'm gonna do it in this kind of like, I'm fun and I'm free and I'm flowing. Yeah. Like it's very this kind of like, I don't know, like I sometimes I've used Sagittarius energy as like able to be like, no, like I'm gonna say what I'm gonna say and I'm gonna have fun doing it. Right. And like, whereas mine, I have a Scorpio moon, and like Scorpio moon is I mean, Scorpio moon can have fun, but like it's much more serious, and it's much more like, here are the facts, here's what's fucked up, this is why this is happening. Yeah. And I think I've always had this idea, this perception that people have always told me that like I'm so serious all the time. And like, I'm like, no, I'm just stating things like very matter of fact and clearly, and I don't have time for your bullshit. Yeah. And I think that like sometimes people want the humor a little bit more so that they feel a little less like, oof, like, you know, I don't know. And I think that I have a hard time with that.
Yeah. I mean, I think, and I do think that there's room for all kinds of approaches, right? And the thing is, like, I'm not necessarily, you know, when I think about my own history and the way that I was learning things, like the way that I learned to ferment my politics was spending a lot of time, I think, with people who have that very no nonsense. Like, yeah, here's what's going on, right? Here's what you need to understand. You know, when I think about like, you know, people I grew up with who were, you know, union leaders or were working in reproductive rights, and they were, you know, they were people who knew how to talk to an audience, but they were people who saw also the seriousness in it. Yeah. So like, I mean, I think that there's, you know, I think that part of the way that I talk about my politics is just because that's how I talk about my life. Oh yeah. You know, yeah, of course. So, but I think that, you know, I think that sort of very deliberate kind of hardline thing, like, yeah, it is maybe sometimes difficult for people to think, but if there's one person out there who really listens, then like you've done your job. You know?
True. So, but yeah, but like going back to the wedding, I just remember Rachel and I were reflecting on this a little bit as we were talking, and I think that like that was like a really actually like a really important moment in my life because it was a queer wedding. It was the first queer wedding I've ever been to. And like also I don't really know this for sure, but like a majority of visibly queer people were there. And I felt like I was able to like be like, oh, like this is a space where I get to actually exist and like be amongst my queer community in a way that like I didn't know everyone, but it was queer, so I felt like I knew them.
Yeah.
And it just like felt really good. And I think that's why like everyone, like a lot of people after the wedding were like, oh my God, like you were like so like you were just like in a different world. And I was, because I like felt so joyous and so connected because like I was like, it was like, it kind of felt like to me like it was like my 5-year-old that was like, I just want to meet all the other queers and like have them like talk to me about like their lives and their stories and like whatever. And I got to meet so many different LGBTQ people there that like I felt so like, oh my God, like these people are here.
Yeah.
And like they're living in the world and they have their own stories and they're unique and we're all different. But like it felt I just felt very connected in that sense.
Yeah. I mean, I think that we were talking about this as well, and I think you said something really perceptive, which is that sometimes a wedding can feel like a prom.
Yes.
You know, in the sense that when you go to prom, right, there's all these attendant like anxieties and
like who's the like conservative uncle who's gonna like say something awful, or the atmosphere is so uptight because everyone is perceptive of that happening that you don't know how, it's like you're like trying to move but you're like I don't know how to connect with you.
That's kind of like every straight wedding I've ever been to, and also straight people, fix your weddings.
Do we think that should be the title of this episode?
Yes.
I'm sure that I'm gonna get like the most hate mail, like from the mail box that doesn't exist. But
why did you let that girl come on your podcast and denigrate heterosexuality for an hour?
You know, it's so funny that this is something that I noticed with there's this person I follow, and they've been like a really great speaker and like leader in the queer space and trans and non-binary space, a look big men in. And I saw them perform live a couple of months ago, and they do a combo of kind of like they read their poetry and then they also do their stand-up comedy, and a lot of their comedy is specifically geared towards a queer audience. Like it's like for queer people. And I think that like something that they talk about a lot that really resonates is like we like need spaces to like gear towards queer people,
right?
Because like even when there is quote like representation or queer people are talked about or whatever, it's still almost like you're being talked about, rather than like it being directed at you. And being like, no, like we're here to do that. And I think that like kind of corresponds with what I was talking about with the wedding and also like when you said like straight people fix your weddings, right? It's like we get to finally say something like that, and it not have to be this like defense or this like straight people being like, oh my God, blah, 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 blah. My wedding was inclusive, like, right, like.
And it's like, yeah, I'm sure it was inclusive, but it's not the same thing, right? Because it's still like a space that has particular sets of boundaries, and it's not necessarily anybody's fault. It's just a different thing. And when you're in a space, I think of real queer joy, which I really think that wedding was.
Yes, it was.
The vibe feels so liberated in a way. And you know, maybe it was also like, you know, that we were just, you know, it was the first sort of like in-person thing I'd done, you know, since being like vaccinated and all of this stuff. But there was this just, I don't know, like it felt really, I don't really have that much memory of the wedding. But
I don't really.
That sort of like, and Steve and John, it's not because it was bad. It's because we were, you had an open bar. But I think that like when I think about the kind of memory of that night, just how good I felt and how connected I felt to everyone, and you know, how connected I felt to you and how connected we stayed, even though it was like
a moment in
this
time.
chance meeting, right?
And I think it also like highlights to me I don't know, like I think sometimes I have this perception in my mind that like you have to take a really slow and steady approach to relationships, and they have to like build in this way, and you have like there's like all of these like I think rules I have in my head sometimes around how I'm supposed to connect with people. That wedding I think really proved that I was like, no, like I can meet someone one night and like, you know, like we didn't instantly become best friends and we didn't like text each other every day. But like we stayed connected and we actually were able to form an actual connection and friendship or relationship. And that can happen from intentional spaces that are created where I think like love, authenticity, care can be present in the space. And I think that can manifest a relationship happening when in other spaces we could have been at the same wedding and maybe we like not a different wedding, like a different type of wedding, and maybe we wouldn't have connected in the same way. Do you know?
No, I absolutely know what you mean. Yeah, I mean, I think that like, you know, and again, I guess this is what I sort of mean about, you know, feeling like when you're in a liberated space, you're doing liberated things, right? And so
yes I think that needs to be the quote for the world in 2020. When you're in a liberated space, you do liberated things. And space means community, and it does not just mean your own body. It means when there is physical space in the world for liberation, people act and respond and do different things. And I guess I'm feeling very high horse about this right now.
No, I'm, you know, you should, it's true. And you should say it like,
yes, more of this.
What was I going to say? I mean, I think that the way that I feel like I've done relationships, particularly friendships, has always been like to have that impulse to want to dive in right away. Like if I meet somebody and I really like them, I'll be like, okay, we're friends now. Like this is how it's working. And I'm also a mixer, which I feel like sometimes stresses people out. So also like,
what's a mixer?
Like I like to have, so like if I meet someone, right, and my thought is instantaneously like, well, I like them, so my other friend should also like them. So I'm very quick to try to bring groups together, and I think that works with like I've had people before be like, you doing that stresses me out. But I feel like that's I want to have this like somehow this community. Circle, you know, and I'm not so good at having like kind of discrete, like, okay, these are my work friends, these are school friends, these are, you know, college friends. I'm always trying to like put everyone, I'm basically trying to like match make friends basically a lot of the time.
That's cool.
And I don't know, would you find that stressful, do you think?
I think it depends on the context.
Yeah.
Like, I think that if I knew that like you were trying to do it without letting me know, I think that's why I would have an issue with it. Not that you were doing it.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like, I think that if you were like, hey, I really want you to be part of like my friend group. Right. Or like, I really want you to meet these people because I think that you would really like them. Yeah. I would be like, that's so cool. Yeah. But I think that like, if there was like some like, if you were like, okay, we're going to meet with my friends now. Yeah. And like, I want you to like them. I'd be like, yeah. I'd be like, well, now I want to not like them because you told me I need to. Not for any reason about them. So I think that it kind of depends on the intent of how I would be introduced or be asked to like do that sort of thing. To me, it's all about intent and consent. Yeah. I think for me, I don't know if it's always been the same. I don't know if it's always been the former for me. Like, I feel like that's something I had to learn where it's like, you absolutely cannot make two people that you like also like each other. I'd be like very disappointed in that. But I don't know. I grew up and I guess I learned something about, you know, about how people function, but I still sometimes am like, let's just all be like one big group and you know, let's all be in community. But it depends on my mood too, because sometimes I'm just like, no, I just really want to hang out with one person. Yeah. And I really just want one person to hang out with. And then sometimes I'm like, let's mingle. Yeah. But I think this is also something I was talking about earlier too. Like, I'm a very mercurial person. And so I think it's hard sometimes because when I make plans, sometimes I want to change them because I'm like, well, 2 weeks ago I did want to have a big group, but now I actually just want to hang out with one person. And it actually has nothing to do with the group or the
Right.
people or whatever. It's just like, no, like my mind changed.
Yeah.
And like that can create hardships in relationships when you're constantly changing your mind, or like
Mhm.
you're inconsistent about your plans. And I do also, I used to follow through.
Yeah.
But even if my mood was not there, I'd be like, no, I committed to this. I want to show up for this person, whatever. And I've actually had to start learning to say like, hey, I'm sorry. I know we were going to hang out, but I'm not going to, because I'm just not. And like learning that like that's okay for me to say, because I thought that would mean like that they would perceive it as like a rejection of them or like whatever. But so that's kind of how I've had to like grow in that capacity.
Yeah, I think I also, I think, have had to do some of that, just in the sense of like, I think when I was a kid, I often felt really lonely. You know, just like I was just sort of like a bookish kid, and I had this very internal sort of world. And when I got older and I was able to have lots of sort of successful friendships, I felt often this anxiety about keeping them, to the point, right, where it would be like I would be neglecting my own urge to be like, I don't want to do, I need to be alone for a while, or I need to not be in this huge group, or I need to not be hanging out with people who actually like make me miserable. And because I perceived it both as like, not only will they think that I'm being rude, which is like the worst thing, right, for a child of WASPs, right, to be like, oh my God, you're being rude.
You're being rude. You're being rude by not like abiding by the standard that no one has talked about, but everyone understands.
Damn well.
Oh my God, I could write a dissertation on that. Like Midwestern WASPs and their unstated expectations of relationships. By Blake Kelley.
So I had not only that feeling, I think, but also this feeling of like, okay, like, is this as good as it's going to get? And it's like, as I've learned that that's not, as I've learned that I can have a reality beyond that, I think my relationships and the time that I spend with people that I'm in relationship with has been much better, because I can actually like show up and be fully present in those moments. Rather than like being panicked all the time. Right. Panicked and guilty. Right. Which is like,
right. Because then even if you do show up and you don't want to be there, then you're like, oh, I shouldn't be acting like I don't want to be here, because I said I was going to be here.
Exactly.
Right? Like it's
but like people can tell, I think, when you're giving off.
When you're giving off that vibe. And then you think you're being authentic, and it's like a whole maze. I completely understand where you're coming from on that.
I mean, the WASP thing is, you grow up with these, you grow up with sort of like rules in place. And the weird thing is that like my parents were not, I mean, my dad's Jewish, so there's totally different cultural context. And my mom, who comes from this WASP family, I always feel like is always trying to like push on that a little bit, but it's just like, it's the WASP, the hegemon is so
deep.
It runs so deep.
It runs so deep, and like you don't know you're in it when you're so in it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And like for people that have lived in it their entire lives, it's kind of like, okay, this is your reality.
Why am I so conflict avoidant? Like, why am I so and just like not talking about anything until you have like
there's an explosion,
some kind of explosive blow up. But I don't know. It's I don't know. What else should we talk about?
Oh yeah, sorry.
Get off the WASPs.
Oh yeah, no.
I could go on forever.
Yeah, no. What has been, have you noticed, has been like, if you just want to talk about like what's going on in your life recently, or anything like you want to talk about or share with people that's like interesting, or like potentially even what I ask people is like, is there a story that you like sharing about your life, or is there like a story or a narrative about your life that like is like interesting to think about? Because one of the things that I think about like with the podcast Curious Storyteller is very much like we understand each other through stories, and we understand each other through like telling of stories too, and like I don't know. I kind like this. Wanted this to also kind of be a platform for people to share parts of their stories with people, but they want to, of course.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, I always feel like I have this perception of myself as being as being very being sort of like middle of the road, very average. And, I was, like I said, I was this sort of, very bookish kid. I had this very intense sort of inner world, which I feel like I do still have to a certain extent. I think it's very easy for me to sort of retreat into daydreaming a lot. So like I have these very like elaborate kind of scenarios sometimes where I'm, and I think this is something that other people have too. Like as I've met more people, just talking to them about like, how many times a day would you say that you retreat into a fantasy world of your own making? Do
you feel comfortable giving an example of what one of these fantasy worlds are?
I mean, for me, like for the longest time, right? I mean, I think I imagine myself in this very like external way. So like when I learned that not everybody has an inner monologue.
Oh, that's crazy. It's wild to me.
I find it like incredibly
I'm like, what? I'm like, what do you mean you don't have an internal monologue?
Like, it's hard for me because then I'm like, well, what what's like, how are you alone with yourself all day?
Right.
Like that.
But then I like ask them that question. They're like, what do you mean? I just am. And I kind of like look at them like I'm like I have moments, right? I have moments where I feel completely like my body feels at peace, or like I feel this like sense of like calm or like whatever, and it's my brain is quiet, and I don't know if I've like paid attention to be like, oh, my inner monologue isn't working right now. But like I do have moments of like complete peace, but even then there is a dialogue happening in my head that's kind of like not analyzing, but that's very just like perceptive of what's happening. And I just like, it doesn't make sense to me when people tell me that they don't have an internal monologue, because I was like, I don't know how to even understand your experience.
Exactly.
That and it's like I don't know how to understand you. Because it's like I don't like what. Like how do you move? How do you go out throughout the day? I just like
it's something that, because for me, I mean, I think the one way that this sort of like internal world, the way that I've preserved it is, I think that my internal monologue often is if it's like I'm a story in something that I'm also narrating. Right. That I'm a character in a sort of hyper realistic sort of world. So I'm still me, but I'm moving throughout space in a way where.
Do you think you like witness yourself, or is it less that way?
I think that in some ways I do. I mean, I think it's very easy for me to externalize. I don't know what that says, but like, I sometimes I see the way that I move through the world as if like I'm both engaging in it and I'm watching myself engage in it.
Okay.
And so, that kind of fantasy world is something that I think that I've always had. And it's part of why, I mean, before I started the kind of like PhD gig, and before I moved to like doing social science, my first love was always writing, like always creative writing. So I went to art school. And there I did all different kinds of creative writing, poetry, short story writing, which was my favorite.
I didn't know any of this.
Yeah, so I went to the Creative and Performing Arts High School in Pittsburgh, and then started out wanting to be an English major, and then like got sort of like moved to history. But like even now, when I talk to people about what I would want, the way that I would want my life to look, it would always be like doing something that gives me time to come home at night and work on, a creative project, work on a
writing project.
Yeah, on something that is not tied to work necessarily, but is like just for me.
Yeah.
So
have you been able to do that at all?
Like, yeah, but I really had to neglect my dissertation to do it. So, I think in the pandemic, I really got back into it, after having not done it for, since college, really. And being like, I'm going to take time every day to work on my stuff, to work on, my novel idea that I've had for a while, to work on, doing. I have a friend that we're working on like screenplay stuff together. It's all that kind of thing. And I find that so restorative because I like to spend time occupying those worlds. I also was like a big Lord of the Rings kid, and like Lord of the Rings is like a fully realized universe.
Yeah.
And so there's something about that kind of thing that like itches my brain.
I'm very into like I don't know, like I guess is it fantasy the genre?
Yeah.
Like fantasy sci-fi-ish.
Yeah.
Like that's like very much my like MO of things that I'm like enthralled with.
What's your like big are you like a series person, or like are there certain series?
Well, so like a TV show that like really got me is the show called The Magicians on Sci-Fi.
I haven't seen it, and it's supposed to be so good. I know.
I could talk about this show forever. I haven't seen it in a couple of years because I like obviously I had to take a break after I watched the first full thing, and I like convinced my friend Sam to watch it too, and she like her and I have very different TV interests, right. But she like I like was like, you have to watch this, and so then she finally did, and it's basically like people basically, there's like the quote world without magic, and then there's the world with magic,
right?
And like people they do go to the school, but it's more like grad school. Yeah, it's like grad school for magicians. So like that's kind of the theme.
Okay.
And then there's like a group of friends, and they all have their own thing, but the reason why I like the show so much is because it's very realistic about the fact that like magic doesn't solve any of their problems,
right?
And like yes, they have all of these like really interesting or unique things that they can do, but they end up like fucking themselves over way more, because they use the magic in like ways because they can't, like they're still human,
right?
And I think that like that show kind of highlights that like almost kind of the demysticism, if that's a word, or demystifying of like thinking that like if we all just had magic, like our lives would be like so much better or something like that. And at least in that context, right?
Yeah.
And like it kind of shows that like they just go through their lives still like trying to like figure all of it out, but at the same time it's still very clear that they're all just as fucked up as everyone else. And that like it's also kind of the like, I mean, I've never been to grad school, but people can talk about grad school as if it's this like deep dark place. And I think that like I don't know, they're just like really real, honestly, about the characters.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of character development too, and like that's something I really look for in a show. And so that show like really, I don't know, like I there's nothing specifically I can say about it of like one person or one character, but like I think it's like it's based on a book series, but then the show then went with it and then wrote past what the book was.
Okay.
So like it starts with the originality of like the characters from the book, and then they kind of build on it again.
Okay.
And then they finally ended it, and they kind of had to, but I was like, don't end it. It was just like so fucking good. But I mean, I watch all, and if there's a Netflix show or like whatever, The Motherland. Oh my God. Okay. Okay. It's on Hulu.
Okay.
The premise of the show, it's the producers are Adam McKay and Will Ferrell.
Okay.
So the premise of the show is that the witches of Salem expose themselves to the American government during the Revolutionary War.
Okay.
And they say like, hey, we will help you defeat the British if you basically make sure that we are like then included and assimilated into culture.
Okay.
So like that isn't really that is like the premise of the show, but that is not the show. It goes to modern day, which is that witches are the American military and only women are in the military. And so it's this huge like juxtaposition, or like I don't know what the word you would use for that, but like kind of like a turning the tables on saying like it's only women in the military, and also that like it's like witches that are the military too, but then like there's this hostility still by the American people towards witches, that they think that they're better than everyone else.
Right.
And this kind of like, oh, like witches are elitists, or like this whole thing. And there's always this kind of like still battle between like, even though they've been assimilated and they are, quote, the protectors of the US of the American people, that the American people still hate them. Right. And it's still kind of, I think, like an observation around the idea that assimilation, if you don't actually have integration, does not work. And I kind of think that that's what like that show was like. I mean, that's very high level, but like that's kind of what that show was like saying, like kind of showing to me. Like, if you are a marginalized group, it does not matter how much you try to fit in. If they still do not like you, they're not gonna like you. Yeah. And I think that like that really provided a lot of like, I don't know, like a lot of like affirmation for me as a queer person, that like you can try to be like the best queer that you can to whoever, and like it doesn't matter. Like people are still gonna not like you because you know, because you're queer.
Yeah. Okay, speaking of queers and fantasy, because when you were talking about the magicians, it was just reminding me of one of the things that I always found so frustrating about Harry Potter. Yeah. Which, like, okay, let's talk shit on Harry Potter. Because, sure. Okay.
I mean, which is that we're down that road.
It's a world that makes no sense, right? It's a world. First of all, where do they learn to? This is always like the thing now that when people bring up Harry Potter, I'm like, here's the thing: where do they learn to read? Where do they learn to do basic math? They don't. It's a whole society that she didn't think through. I mean, leaving aside the racial and gender politics of it, which could again be its own podcast. It could be its own podcast, and probably people will know how we feel about it. Yeah. But the fact that there's no elementary education in this world, right, absolutely grates on me.
You know, that's not something I actually like. I don't know if I've actually thought about that.
Think about it.
Yeah.
Do they pay taxes?
No.
Do they? No.
I mean, do you think maybe in the wizarding world they do? I don't know.
I mean, they have no credit system. They're finance.
Well, what about the Goblins Bank or whatever?
Yeah, but they're trading like they're trading in like doubloons.
Right.
I mean, you know, right. There's no financial security.
Yeah. The other, yeah. No.
Anyway, sorry, that's like
no. The other one I want to mention, which this is a book series, it never got turned into anything, was called Red Rising. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but it's basically like it's a book series, and there's 3 of them, and now I think there's 6. Okay. And I think I've read 5 of the 6. But the series premise is basically this guy's on Mars. He's with his wife. They're kind of like very low income. And the idea is like the human race has expanded into the solar system now. And they're told that they basically have to do a lot of mining on Mars. And once they do, then the rest of everyone else will come to Mars and they will not have to do it anymore. Yeah. So at the very beginning of the book, this is within the first 15 pages, so I'm not ruining it if you're like wanting to read it. Basically his wife stands up to the people in charge and is like, this is unjust, basically unjust, like labor, right? Like basically like very, very harsh conditions, whatever. They execute her. So then the main character, the guy, gets like enraged and then like kind of like tries to sneak around to figure out what's happening. Right. And then basically realizes that like everyone on Mars that is mining are actually just slaves. And they're being told this story and this narrative that like the human race hasn't expanded yet, when really it's like they're everywhere. Yeah. And so they're basically just being all told this lie so that they'll just keep working their entire lives. Wow. And so his goal then becomes that he's going to work his way up throughout the entire system and then destroy it. Okay. And like, so like the entire first book is like him going into like the training that like of the elites. Yeah. Right? And there's like a class system. It's like it's classed by colors. So like Mars is red, which is like the bottom. Right. And then they're golds, which is like the, you know, the like, okay. Yeah. Whatever. I mean, it's been a couple of years since I read this book. the books, but like if you love political sci-fi, oh my gosh, like it is so good. Also, it had some queer characters in it when I still felt that there weren't a lot of queer characters in sci-fi, at least mainstream.
Yeah.
So that's another one that I absolutely love. And yeah. Have you, speaking of Lord of the Rings, though, did you watch the Rings of Power? Is that what it's called?
Yeah, so I did watch the first 3-ish episodes. I mean, I don't. Do you know a lot about sort of the Tolkien world? And
I am not a like.
Okay.
I have watched all of Lord of the Rings.
Okay.
And I did watch that full prequel season.
Okay.
So like I can speak about it, but I am not. I would not consider myself like educated enough to have strong opinions.
Okay. Because like for me, you know, I mean, when I say like I was a Lord of the Rings kid, it's sort of that's understating. I like because my thing was Lord of the Rings came out, I think I was about 9 in 2001. And the minute I saw like Elijah Wood, Orlando Bloom, Viggo Mortensen on that screen, I was like, I'm a woman now.
Yes. Yes.
The impetus, I think, for my Lord of the Rings obsession was just like
I just like want to picture like how old are you in this moment?
Like 9.
I would love to see 9-year-old Rachel in a movie theater.
I'm in the theater like no joke. I saw Fellowship of the Ring maybe 5 times in theater.
Wow.
Because of the first scene where Elijah Wood gets up and they zoom in right on his eyes. Those like they're not even color context. Those are his real eyes.
Yeah.
They zoom right in. I was like, this is mystifying to me. But like I could not. Yeah. So in my very obsessive, I think, desire to like just get really into it and find out more about like these hot men. I read all the books in quick succession, and then all of the sort of ephemera, including the Silmarillion, which is like the in-universe Bible, basically.
Okay.
It's about the creation of the universe and like the early history of the elves and humans and things like that. And so the Rings of Power is supposed to take place
before, right?
Yeah, like thousands of years before Lord of the Rings. And when, you know, it's like elves are kind of still running things. I mean, you've seen this.
Yeah,
like, you know.
I watched the full season,
and Numenor, which is like the Atlantis, you know, it's like Atlantis. And I think what was hard for me with Rings of Power is that so much of what I enjoyed was the world building of like the 4 episodes that I watched. And to see that kind of to see those people kind of in different contexts. But apparently Amazon couldn't get the rights for a lot of the sort of ephemera for the Silmarillion,
because it would cost too much money.
Yeah, and the Tolkien estate is very cagey about. Apparently, like the estate was really upset with the Peter Jackson movies, even though, you know, it sparked this resurgence and interest in Tolkien, but they were not happy with the sort of flashiness of it.
Okay.
Because Tolkien himself was just kind of like he was like a trad cat, like a kind of, you know, like a very like Oxford professor, you know.
Yeah, right.
Just wanted to like write his 9-page songs and things like that.
Fair.
And so I think that they were really wary of the Amazon thing. So what was like weird for me was like, okay, I sort of understand what's going on, but also like, this is not the elaborate timeline that's lived like permanently in my brainstem for the last 20 years. So I like can't deal.
Fair.
Which I think, but I do think that, you know, all of this stuff that came out about the backlash against Rings of Power, because it was daring to show like elves, you know, that there were people of color on the show, and having like Galadriel as this sort of central figure, which like if you know anything about her at all, like it made perfect sense. That also, was like that I found enraging, and so it was really hard for me to be like, I didn't love it and not have people be like, oh, you like have people try to bring me into like this weird racist club that they,
yeah,
you know.
I mean, as someone that like watched Lord of the Rings and liked it but did not have a strong attachment to it, I did watch the Rings of Power, and I really enjoyed it. I think that Gadriel's like storyline was I really resonated with it because like, you know, the entire time it was like basically everyone was like you're delusional, like straight up, like everyone was like, you're delusional, like what is happening is not happening. And she's like, I don't think so. And like straight up was like the first episode, I thought she was such a badass when like she was like basically forced to ascend to heaven, and she was like, no. And I was like, yes, like yes, like this idea, and like right, like because it was also like this is the highest thing that elves can do, and like we're giving you this gift, when really it was kind of this like sinisterous, like get out, like we don't want you here anymore. But like, so go to heaven. And she's like, bitch, like I'm here to save everyone. Like, and like, you know, like the line that she kept on talking about is like, and she repeated it multiple times, but in different contexts. That, you know, like in order to find the light, you must first touch the darkness. And I really love that as a concept, because I think in like current reality, there's this nuance of toxic positivity, and like this idea that we always have to be this like, that like once we're like a fully evolved, we're like all these like fucking enlightened people. And it's like, no, we all carry darkness. And like darkness is actually even okay. And like you actually have to be with the darkness to like understand the light. And I don't know. There's a lot about it that I actually really resonated with.
I think I am gonna go and watch the rest of it. Just because I feel like I owe it to myself, because like people that I trust and whose values I appreciate, or whose opinions I appreciate, like you and others have been like, no, it's actually great. I just think I have to like get past I have to see it as its own product,
rather than the like nostalgia.
And it's like, I straight up loved like House of the Dragon, for example. And I know people who are like big George R.R. Martin fans who were having the same thing, being like, it's not this, it's not that. And I would, you know, with that, I was able to be like, you guys need to like get a grip.
Now that is one thing I like. I don't know, people might hate me for this, and I just like don't care. I just don't like what is it,
like Game of Thrones.
I do not like Game of Thrones. I watched the entire first season and I was like, I like, this is giving me nothing. And then the final season, I watched the last 3 episodes because everyone everyone was like, and I did, and I still was like, this means nothing to me. Like I read about it in between, basically, to get the cliff notes of what's happening, and I know that's probably the reason why I didn't care, but I still was just like, I don't know. I had a really hard time connecting with that show. And I also think it's just because it was really bloody and violent. And unnecessarily so. And I think for me, like I do not have a problem with things being bloody or like violent, but like when it's doing it for violence sake, I feel very disconnected. And I'm just kind of like, okay.
I do think that Game of Thrones, like that like because House of the Dragon is a prequel, right? I think that Game of Thrones, the series, suffered a little bit from like HBO syndrome, where it is sort of like a lot of gratuitous blood and sexual violence, especially. Which, you know, I found difficult to deal with. I did like the show, and again, I think because it did itch some sort of Lord of the Ringsy part of my brain. You know, I'm like, this is a fully realized universe, and this is. But I get the same feeling from like Star Trek, which is not, which is radically different from you know, Lord of the Rings and Game of Thrones, in the sense, right, that it's a utopia, not a dystopia, but it still scratches that like. Politics, you know, magical politics feels good. Part of my brain, you know.
Maybe bringing that back to like, because you were saying like you got lost a lot in daydreaming. Like, do you think that there was, like, what kind of tied that to? Have you always just have this like dreaminess or like connection to like world building or?
I mean, when I was a kid, you know, like I always, I think, have felt I always have felt really drawn to doing that kind of work and to being attached to dreaming and also to mysticism in a way. So, you know, I was very interested as a kid in like religious mysticism. I think from what I've heard talking to like other, particularly women who have gone into like religious studies or anthropology, is that they all go through this kind of like weird religious phase as kids where they like, I really wanted to be a saint and I was like really obsessed with like the lives of saints. We're not Catholic. Like I was not engaging with saints in any way.
Yeah.
But I was like, I want to have a transcendent experience. Okay. Like, oh my God.
That could not be more of a Sag moon description if I ever heard one. Because like Sagittarius energy, like of impersonal planets, like especially a moon sign, is like you know, like religious or spiritualism, like education and or transformation of experience.
Yeah.
Like that, like to me, like that is like the envelope. I saw on Instagram one time, like people made shirts for each sign and it said, "No, I'm not going to become a cult leader. I'm just a Sagittarius." and I like cackled because like it's not real, right? Like not all Sagittariuses are cult leaders. And, like, that's like a really obscure thing to say in of itself, right?
Yeah.
But like Sagittarius has that energy of very being like, I want to experience this like metaphysical thing.
Yeah.
And like I'm also gonna learn about it like intensely.
Yeah.
But then also like talk about it relentlessly.
Oh yeah. No, I mean they were sick of me. And like I was just recently talking to somebody about fasting girls, which is this particular genre of saint who they would stop eating basically because they would be claiming that they were being fed like you know, they were being fed from heaven basically, that they were receiving food from heaven. And a lot of times they would like, maybe hopefully this is not too like intense for the podcast, but a lot of times like the medieval fasting girls would like drink water that like lepers' feet had been washed in, or they would eat like scabs and stuff as like as like a symbol of their purity. And I mean, that wasn't the kind of shit, like, that wasn't what the kind of thing that I was thinking of, but I was thinking like, you know, like I'm gonna touch the face of God, you know, it was like this kind of thing. And as I got older, I think, you know, that kind of intense thing like fell away, but I was always very interested in thinking about these other worlds, right? And thinking about these other kinds of states.
Do you think that thinking about that other world building was like its own version of touching God, if you will?
Yeah. But I would have to.
Sorry, there's my hard-hitting question for you.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's something very sacred in the creative process.
Yeah.
And I think I don't mean sacred necessarily in like a dogmatic sort of
or
way.
like a religious context.
Yeah, but I do think that there's something about going through that process and the sort of like generative headspace and that is set apart from, you know, the rest of life, which is sort of the oldest definition of sacred, right? Something that's set apart. And so I have always felt like there is a kind of holy energy in people who have that capacity to create. Yeah. And I think that thinking about it in that way both has helped me sort of reconcile myself to religion, and has helped me, I think through like my own interest in like spirituality and religion. I think in a world where religion is so damaging also. So I'm also like working through my own shit about that and to try to seek it out that kind of transcendence in things like art, in music, in, you know, in care, you know, in relationships between human beings. That's been really profoundly healing for me, I think.
I think you actually touch on something that's really, that like, I don't know, I'm sure people talk about, but like that transcendence in of itself can actually like comes from where we are,
Yeah.
like, and where we've
Yeah.
like physically are, and how we connect with people and what we experience. And like watching a musical for me is transcendent,
Right.
like, and we all have our own thing,
Yeah.
right? But like me watching a certain musical is transcendent for me, or like me listening to a certain piece of music is transcendent for me. And like, is that spiritual? I don't know.
Yeah.
Like it's kind of one of those things you can debate it all day
Right.
long, but there is no answer.
Right.
And I think that for me, it's become a lot less, as someone that has a lot that is healing from a deep religious trauma. It's been like less about me healing like my relationship to, quote, like organized religion
Right.
of a church, and more about how I feel like deeply connected to everyone
Yeah.
around me.
Yeah.
And like, regardless of doctrination or dogma or zealotry or
Right.
or whatever.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think it's just, it helps you to in some ways, at least it's helped me to sort of disjoint those feelings from that feeling of connection, that feeling of being somehow in union with everyone, from like a certain dogmatic tradition.
Yeah.
Right. Because it's like, you don't just have to, that doesn't just come from the space of the church or something like that. Right. Which I find really, I don't know. I think when I was able to think about things in that way, you know, I was raised in a very religious family, but I was raised in it was very liberal religious family. So I didn't come out necessarily with a lot of, I think, religious trauma in the way that like other queer people have experienced religious trauma. But I think that I did come out with somehow this knowledge that like institutions are not safe. Like those sorts of institutions just are not safe.
Yeah. Because
there's no like
right.
You know, so
which there aren't.
Right. So I think that I was sort of on this like journey of self-discovery, if I can be like very like woo about it. But like I think that now, you know, that's where I sort of am able to feel those feelings when I'm with people. You know, like to me, you know, being in a bar with a lot of my good friends and talk and you know, or that wedding, you know, to me, that's something where I feel that kind of like, you know, what the Quakers call it the still small voice, right? Where you just feel that intense connection. And it's like this, it's somehow this transcendent thing. Yeah. I feel that.
I feel it too. I think that like, that's kind of been my own quest, if you will, is to seek that out, not in a way where I'm like clawing for it, but in a way where I'm like, where do I experience this and how do I experience it?
Right.
So yeah, I mean, I think I was also very much like in Fantasyland or world building as well, but just, I mean, mainly because like it gave me solace to like not be in the situation that I was in anymore, or just like that I didn't have to think about it for a second. And I think I was always kind of quite obsessed with like other worlds and like mystical powers and like, you know, kind of being drawn into this world of like going on a quest or something like that, because I don't know, it was just I was just always very drawn to it.
Yeah. Something about like the quest, right? Because that's like, I mean, all of fantasy is centered around that.
A quest.
Right? And it is this sort of, you know, so like in the South Asian Islamic tradition, which is the way that I got interested in studying India was through studying Sufism in South Asia. So Sufis being like Islamic mysticism. And in South Asia, a lot of the ways in which the Sufis sort of talk about the mystic experience is to do it through storytelling, and particularly through like fairy tales. That kind of, it's called, so in Persian it's called the dastan, right? It's the it's like the hero's journey, basically. And it's sort of like, it's one of those things where it's like, okay, you think that they're writing about like sex, but they're actually writing about God. And when it seems like they're writing about God, they're actually writing about sex. And so, you know, when I was, you know, studying Urdu and I was like doing these translations, I was like, this tracks somehow, you know, that there is this connection between that kind of narrative form and this like, and this desire to somehow be more than just to see more than what is, right?
Yes. Whatever that happens to be.
Right, whatever that is.
Yeah.
And so
yeah. I understand what you're saying, and I think that like I definitely feel that a lot of like this deep desire to experience more than what is. But at the same time, I think I also have to like ground myself in that, like not seeking just to seek.
Yeah.
And like not seeking because I don't know what else is, like because I'm like seeking something outside of myself.
Yeah.
And like what's the balance between that?
Yeah.
And like also that like, you know, religion, indoctrinated or zealotry religion has used that quest knowledge to like murder so many people.
Yeah.
And so, you know, there's been countless wars throughout our civilization based on that sort of like quest. And so I think it's kind of you know, like holding the balance between this idea of quest and also this idea of people using that as justification for unmoral behavior, or I don't know, not unmoral, but like violent behavior. I would say.
Yeah, I mean, I think like as much as, you know, because it's also so like the whole idea of the quest in the night and the, you know, all this stuff, it's also been used very much so by the right wing, right? I was just, as I was like sitting here talking to you about like Sufi fairy tales and stuff, I'm thinking about like someone like Jordan Peterson, who also uses this like dragon, you know, like slaying the dragon kind of imagery to like basically tell young men like, you know, like the way that you do this is to like vote Republican, which like, which is like, so.
And I think that actually, I think that really highlights too something that like I think about a lot, because I really feel like an experience when I am seeing movies or like when I'm experiencing art, kind of how like you were saying like that, and just how much power I really think that like media creators and like storytellers actually have, and how they actually dictate culture in a lot of ways. And the people that have the platform to end up being able to reach those audience have such wider impact than like we ever will know. And I just think it highlights to me just how much I want, I don't know, like not just like queer, but just like people of different groups in general to be able to like have that to be able to have those stories told, because telling those stories is actually what changes the culture. And I think that's why in recent times, like with the Don't Say Gay bill and the like whatever, the all the other shit that's happening in Florida, and like all of these, you know, these like attacks of trying to stop, you know, drag performances, is because they're trying to stop us from telling our stories. Right. And it's like it's like not the first, but it's the many steps of fascism of like burning books and like banning books, because we don't want, because if our story isn't told, then we don't exist. And it's a form of erasure. And I think that that's also why I think I've always been drawn to otherworldly storytelling, because I've always been like, I want to know the depth and the breadth of like other people's understanding of their own lives and how they live it, and like what comes from that and what that experience is like for everyone. And I think that like when we're sold, and we're like, even in this current like society that we live in, that like it's like 85% really kind of the same narrative, and the same people telling the same stories, and you're kind of like, there's other stories, guys, like like we really need to really to like focus on other people's stories.
This is a conversation I have with my students a lot, because you know, I teach like legal studies, and they'll often want to talk about things like the Don't Say Gay bill. Like, what is the purpose of that? And their thing is like, when society's so advanced, why advanced in their thinking, like, why are these things still happening? And I'm always like, when people are taken out of public life, which I think is the same thing you mean, right? When people can't tell their stories, they, first of all, they can't fight back, right? Because they're driven so outside of this community, right? And also that when people don't tell their stories, other people don't hear those stories, right? And I'm always like, the supreme fear is for the powers of oppression, right, is that more people hear those stories and more people see themselves in those stories too, right?
Mhm.
And say,
Mhm.
you know, and we move towards a more liberated space.
Yeah, and I think speaking now from like my own experience of
Mhm.
growing up like queer in a very
Mhm.
small town in, you know, the border of Illinois and Iowa, like, you know, 1,600 people in my hometown, like there was no queer representation. And like there were no stories being told about queer people, and queer
Mhm.
people did not exist in public in my hometown.
Yeah.
So like, you know, the only stories that were being told, or the only stories that I heard about queer stories,
Yeah.
was on the news, basically of people dying from AIDS.
Yeah.
And it was a very like, it was like, if and it, that then that narrative then got created that like if you were gay or queer, then you were gonna get AIDS and die.
Yeah.
Right. And like, because that's the only narrative that existed. And so like, you know, even when Will and Grace came along and whatever, I mean, I guess it was representation, and in of itself it was I guess revolutionary at the time, but it was still like, I don't know, like a very like butt of the joke sort of um representation that we had to sort of like be funny, but in a way that was deprecating,
Yeah.
in order for people to like kind of accept us. And so I think, I don't know, for me, the reason why storytelling is so important is because it allows other people to witness themselves through other people's stories.
Yeah, I think that's you know, and I think it's important that people hear those stories when they're young, right? I mean, as young as possible, really.
Right.
You know, and again, like I think that's so much of where the fear and the rage and the hatred is coming, things like banning drag shows and things like this, because this idea that young people can learn early on, right? Can learn early on that not only is this something you can be, but it's also something that you can thrive being, right? It's not something that is only like dark or antisocial, you know, which is the narrative that was sold to us for so long, right? And I remember like being, you know, I must have been in high school, and you know, when I went to high school, I had, you know, at the art school, there were so many queer teachers that I had. And I was just sort of like coming to an understanding of myself at that age, and just seeing, right, like these queer elders who like I had a teacher who I took film appreciation from. When you were a senior, if you had really good grades, you could take film appreciation.
Ooh,
and
look at you.
I know. And he would just tell us all the time about like, he would just tell us stories about like being young and being at Studio 54 and like having this really just vibrant queer life,
Yeah.
you know, and like to me, having those people in my life when I was a kid, or, you know, a young person, it was so important, I think, for my perception of my future self, to see people thrive, you know, not to see people thriving and happy.
Oh man, I would have killed for that. Sorry, I'm not trying to make this
Mr.
up.
Keener, if you're out there, you're listening, we love you.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, that was like, it was a big thing for me, I think, and I'd grown, you know, I'd grown up with queer people. My one of my mother's uncles was gay, and he was, I mean, this was in the 1950s, in like right on the border of Pennsylvania and West Virginia, and it was just something that was so it wasn't even that it was something that was like denigrated. It was just that it just didn't exist, right? It was not something that that people like talked about. And it wasn't until after he died that we really learned like the full extent of the queer life that he had lived. And you know, it's hard for me to think about how it must have been for him. But I also think that he was somebody who he was always like a mentor to me, because he was like very eccentric, definitely somebody who was like living in who had like also a deep internal world. But even just to know, right, that like he existed, and that like he had the way that he loved and the people that he loved and the way that he built his community. Like, just to know that that existed in like Fayette County, Pennsylvania in the 1950s. And there's an archive on like reel-to-reels and things like that, and letters and all this stuff. Like, to me, it's like, this is what I mean when I talk about like a sacred or holy thing, you know? Like, just to know that that was there.
Yeah. That's so sweet. That's so sweet. Well, and that's so great that you also had those teachers in that time to kind of have that affirmation. And it's why queer visibility is so important.
Absolutely.
It's not just, I mean, it's, and I'm not putting pressure on queer people to be more visible. I'm just saying that, like, it's why having visibility is important, so that it can provide that sort of like visibility and understanding for other people. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to make it about me when I was like, I wish I had that. I just like, I'm thinking back and I was like, oh my God.
No, I wish everybody could have
like
it.
I did not have any sense of the term of any queer role model growing up. And I like was like desperately wanting it. And like when I went to college, it was interesting because I then was on a competitive speech team. And the speech community was like predominantly LGBTQ. And so it was like really weird because I went from going to having like almost zero queer like friends to like almost all of my friends being queer in like a 2-month span. And it was like, but they were like my peers, they weren't really my mentors. So it was like really, it was just like a really weird juxtaposition for me to go through, that I was all of a sudden like, oh wait, like, okay, you're all queer too. And I can be queer. I think I can be queer. So it was really interesting. But anyway, we could probably talk forever, but I know we're past the hour mark, so we should probably wrap it up. Is there anything else that you wanted to just say or share?
No, I'll just say it again. Straight people fix your wedding. If you take away one thing from if you take that away, episode, my time will not have been ill spent.
Yeah, I love that. I love the adamantness about it. Do you also want to share like at school what you're studying?
Yeah,
you like mentioned it, but like didn't actually talk about it.
Yeah, so I'm a doctoral candidate at the University of Washington. Hopefully graduating this year. Thank you, hire me. And I'm in the School of International Studies there, but I'm trained as an anthropologist. And my interest is in political anthropology. So the relationships that people have with states and state institutions, and how they formulate and think about their political selves.
Which is also a good segue for me to cross brand, which is Rachel and I are also launching a separate podcast called Burn It Down Already, which will probably be premiering around the same time this one comes out. So if you are interested in, hearing Rachel and I riff and gab about political ideology or political understandings of the world, then you should definitely listen to us over there.
Yeah, like and subscribe, folks.
Awesome.
Is that what you say?
I mean, if you, I
don't know.
Yeah, we're new to this.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Rachel.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, for having me on the podcast.
It's an absolute pleasure.
Awesome. Well, I hope all of you enjoyed the very first episode of Curious Storyteller podcast. Of course, my name is Blake Kelley. If you guys have any comments or questions, or you're interested in anything that we talked about, feel free to reach out to either of us. We're up for the conversation. And follow along. And I hope you've enjoyed this episode, and I hope you listen to more. All right. Well, talk to you later. I don't know how to stop it.
You just end the call.
You want to end this call for everyone? Stop recording first. Okay, I will. Oh no, I'm gonna have to cut this now. More options.
Maybe manage recording? Stop recording. There we go.